My name is Bob Plaschke, and for most of my adult life, I've had the privilege to spend time with and serve emergency responders across America and actually across the world. First Response, this podcast, is an effort to get behind the badge and understand the kind of the highs, lows, and challenges that emergency responders face and how they handle them. This podcast is sponsored by PepperBall, where I have the honor to serve as the CEO. PepperBall makes a non-lethal alternative to guns that police use to keep them and the public they serve safe. My guest today is Chief Patton from the Kenosha, Wisconsin Police Department. Chief Patton's been there about 2 years. Chief, welcome to First Responder Podcast. Great to have you on. My first question to you is, how does a new chief think about his role or his or her role in policing in the United States, given all the changes over the last years? Coming in as a new police chief, you have a chance to, and you're relatively young, so you'll be on the job for hopefully many years. When you came in, how did you think about your job maybe differently in terms of what you wanted to get accomplished?
Sure. Again, thanks for having me on this. This is a really cool platform you guys have. I'm 2 years into my role. I had come up with this organization, the Kenosha Police Department, for my entire career. And I'm lucky enough to, at the time, we were having a chief exit, and I took part in a nationwide search for how we're going to be replaced and who's going to take the reins of our department. And I was given that role at age 39. So it was a relatively young age for a police chief. So I knew I was going to be tasked with two really important roles coming in. And I had a lot of time to do it. And I think those two roles really were the simple one, which was manage and run the organization. That was kind of, and the framework behind that was kind of already there. But the one other role that I believe I had to assume was, how was I going to lead change, right? Some of the things that were happening throughout our country, throughout criminal justice in general, and policing specifically, was we were going to help usher in a new type of policing, and how I was going to change, one, who was already in our walls, but also create a culture for those that we were bringing in, as we're always actively recruiting. So how do I merge those with the new techniques and the new culture we want to build? And ultimately, what do we want to be as a police force, and how do we want to serve our community, and getting everyone to buy into that? So that's the big lift, right? Running an organization, day-to-day operations, that's easily done sometimes. The rest, culture building, is a little tougher.
Well, I love how you, you kind of preempted me in the sense of I always try to ask about, how has policing changed and how does it look going forward? You talked about a new way of policing and the cultural changes necessary to support that. Go into more detail. What is that new way of policing and the culture required for that?
Sure. So let's talk, you look at even just my career in general, right? I've got 20 years in law enforcement. When I came in, there was very much the culture of policing when I came in was very much we are the police. People will do what we say. We are the police. These are the rules, and we enforce them. And sometimes that mentality, while it's needed to help survive a very, very hard career, results in a us versus them belief. And we have seen over the last couple of years that is not resulting in the highest level of service that we are actually exist for. Policing, in my belief, is, this is our window, and then we pass it off. And I say this to even new cops. There's a day where I run this organization, and then I retire. And the next day, if I want to visit anyone here, I need to check in at the front counter and have an escort into the building because I'm no longer an employee. My window within the Kenosha Police Department, my time to make the change and serve the community, is essentially so big. And I put everything in motion, and then I step aside for that new era. So we should continue to build upon that. And if you look at my time here, when we started in that mentality of us versus them, that kind of just breeds itself through lack of wellness, a divide between how we can accomplish those goals, and really just survival, because there was a lack of emphasis on those aforementioned reasons, we had to change and pivot to more community involvement, more community engagement, and understanding that we as police exist because people want us there, right? Sure, there's laws that put us in those places, in those positions, but everything we want to accomplish can't be accomplished alone unless we have community buy-in, all of our partners, and we're doing all the policing that people expect of us. There's always going to be a section of population that loves police and what they stand for and what they do, and a section that doesn't. There's a section in between that is very fluid, and it determines on this level of service we provide. How many of that in between can we service to the highest level at every contact, to make sure that we are providing that high level of service? If we're going to call ourselves professional, we have to look inward and reflect and take responsibility for all of our actions. And I think that's where we're starting to see the biggest change in law enforcement. And you're seeing that type of policing, even by the lowest level, brand new officer on the road, is important. Also, when we talked about the organizational structure, almost flipping that on its head, right? Everyone always talks about a chief of police and the impact they can make. I argue in our organization that it's the officer with 3 months on the road and the decision he's going to make in a crisis that is going to affect more greatly how the Kenosha Police Department is viewed and reflected in the community. Because I can go and have all the speeches and all the different events and talk about policies and all the things that we do, but if it's that officer and that one contact and that moment that will change the trajectory of how an individual views us, that will have a much more long-lasting effect than anything I'll ever do.
You know, you talk about leadership and changing the culture. I assume it's to affect that officer with 3 months so that he's as prepared as he can be to make that right decision.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's those are the moldable, right? They're going to learn and adapt to what they walk into. So we have to build it up internally first. Then the moldables come in and we can replicate that type of culture, that type of output, if you will. We're not in the business of making things. That's not our business, right? Our business is straight service. So we're not teaching an individual that, this part goes with this part and then you make it and then you ship it off. We're not a widget making organization. We are a people organization. And if we're not putting those first, that is our mission statement. It's putting people first. And if you enter with that idea, and it's very, very hard in a long career to make sure officers are well enough to have that mentality and remind themselves that this is that specific individual's contact, that moment in their life where they had trauma, crisis, and however we respond and the service we give them is how they will end up viewing us moving forward. And having those individuals accept that and understand that and try to carry that throughout an entire career is a challenge, but one that I think that the stronger culture we build and the higher standard we set helps us do that.
That makes sense. You talk about the, and I've had other police chiefs describe the change in policing. It used to be, what do they say? It was ask, tell, comply. I forgot what it was. It was like, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to tell you, and then I'm going to make you. Ask, tell, and make.
Ask, tell, make. I've asked you. Now I'm telling you. The third is I'm going to make you. And
I'm going to make you.
So it's funny because that will still apply, right? But how is your ask coming across? How is the direction coming across? Because there still will be noncompliance. There's no way to avoid that, right? There are individuals that are that have nothing to lose, and that's just humans, right? But can we do more work on the front end? Can we build relationships on the front end? Can we be more present to where when we show up, there's a higher level of respect or a higher level of they expect more of a vested interest in the outcome of that call, right? And if they truly believe that, because a lot of times in the decisions we make end up with not a great outcome for the individual we're dealing with, but if they can understand the reasoning and that we put the best interest in mind, it's not going to win everybody, but at least we're fair. That's kind of that procedural justice idea. We're having your voice. We're listening to you. This is what we're doing, and this is why. And it's not going to win everybody, right? but it definitely can win internally. And the stronger individuals, the stronger in line with our culture that we have our individuals that are putting that work product, that service externally, comes back full circle. And I've seen that in my early tenure here.
Well, and I think what I've heard as well is that where 20 years ago, 30 years ago, police were expected to come in and solve a specific problem. Hey, someone's broken into the house, or someone's robbed a car, and therefore the ask, tell, make made sense because it was a very discrete issue. Now policing, you are the safety net. You're the response for a much larger swath of issues: domestic disturbances, issues in schools, mental health issues, of where the situation is but significantly more ambiguous, and therefore, to your point, you probably have to ask a bunch more questions just to even understand what you're dealing with, if that's fair.
It for sure. And actually, even the way you had kind of framed that, I actually think that was one of the bigger problems in law enforcement that we're now willing to start helping address law enforcement, not necessarily get us back to our roots where it sounds first to them, but what can police actually intervene on and control, and where do we end up having other partners? What other social services, what other types of processes are out there? Because for the longest time, police were expected to solve everything. And there's a human capacity to everybody. And we just don't have, it's just our bandwidth isn't large enough to solve everything. So what can we do between co-responder models, partnering with different social service agencies? I mean, you're asking cops to be, protectors. You're asking them to be social workers, mental health experts, conflict resolutionists. You're asking them to do a lot. And then when mistakes are made, we can't figure out why. So getting more partners on board and looking at different ways and different crises, and why is that one specifically a police problem versus this one? Because we do intervene in so many, and it's because it's convenience. Who else is out there 365, 24/7? Where you dial three numbers. In the United States, you can dial three numbers and one of us will show up to your house to help you get through something. That's pretty remarkable if you think about it. But you have to have some very, very highly skilled, highly intelligent, and highly motivated and dedicated individuals that are willing to take that role on nowadays.
Well, and I think that's the nature, the changing nature of policing, in quotes, is that the number of situations you're being asked to address has expanded significantly, because the lack of social services that are available at a phone call, that the public has to understand that you're asking a 25-year-old with 3 months experience to step into something, and that they're anxious and they're nervous and they've got adrenaline going. I mean, it's they're human too, and I think what I've heard from other police chiefs is that trying to help folks understand that police are just they're brothers and fathers and sisters and uncles, and they're just people like us, and that they have to deal with these situations. There has to be kind of empathy given back to the police themselves, given the empathy that people are asking the police to show to them. I mean, it's a two-way street.
Is and think about how skilled young 20-year-olds have to be that enter law enforcement if they enter that right out of college or something. And now we get them from all different age ranges and life experience, but think of the average college graduate. Their real life experience sometimes isn't much other than the classroom. And now we're asking them to be an expert and show enough empathy and professionalism to where they walk into, we'll just say the 45-year-old who is going through a divorce and has financial problems with nothing to lose. And there's a 22, 23-year-old officer going to come in there and tell them how things should be. That's a huge challenge, because if I'm that 45-year-old guy who's waking up and still can't make ends meet, the last thing I want to do is have advice from a college kid that just got out. And how do we bridge that gap? What tools can we give that young recent college grad to make them successful in bridging that gap. And that's not a small gap, right? And that's our clientele and who we deal with is wide ranging. So it's a lot. It's a big ask that we make for these young officers, but it's making sure they have the tools to do this early and make sure they have the tools to do it for a 25-year career.
So, kind of let's expand into that. How do you provide those skills? I mean, is it training? Is it kind of mentoring by older officers? I mean, how does that 25-year-old or 21-year-old figure that out? I mean, that's a pretty tall order.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit earlier about the change in policing, right? And I think that is one of them. Before, tactics were always almost exclusively, your defense and arrest tactics and your shooting skills. Well, those are very, very important. And while you use a lot of those, the number one thing that we use in law enforcement, the absolute number one thing we use on a daily basis, you're not going to use your gun every day at work, and you're not going to arrest someone every day at work, and you're not going to fight someone every day at work. But every day at work, you will talk with them, and you're going to have to figure out ways to bring chaos and crisis back to norm. So that's where we change and make a lot of our training. Our training is now, it's still focused on the essentials, right? Making sure that these officers go home every single night, but also what makes their job easier. How can we help them communicate? How can we show them professional communication, de-escalation techniques, all the different things that we can help set them up for success is half of the equation. The other half is letting them know the culture of the Kenosha Police Department, the police department, the organization that you're running, having them understand and buy into that is the model. How can we tell them and hold the standard of, you will always be okay as long as your decision-making puts the persons first and adheres to one of our 4 core values: respect, integrity, service, and excellence. If you're doing all that, there will be mistakes in this career. But if you're adhering to those 4 core values or our mission statement of our culture in general, our standard, you're probably going to be okay because it's with the best interest. All the other mistakes we can work through. So we have that core base there and constant training in these new arenas that were always part of law enforcement. They were probably just a little neglected. And merging those two, I think, really helps put them in a path for success.
The other area that I think has been neglected that you and I talked about before we started the recording is mental health. I saw somewhere where an officer in his career will have 700 traumatic incidents, things that will, can leave a psychological mark on an average person will go through 5 to 6 or 7. So it's significantly more numbers of those traumatic events. Talk about how you, as you said, it's not you don't make widgets. It's a service. It's the person that is going out, and it's their mental health going out into that job. If they're right, they have a chance to live that culture and that mission statement. But if they're not right, if they're having a bad day or a bad week, or they're affected, it affects their ability to provide that service. So tell us, or tell the listeners how you try to address that as a police chief.
Yeah, and it's one of the most talked about topics in law enforcement today is wellness, right? Wellness for our officers, and how do we deal with it? But it has been neglected in the past. Unfortunately, I think it's extremely, extremely simple. I wish there was a better way, but the old adage that hurt people hurt people. If you're putting people who are damaged out in positions to work through more crisis and more trauma, you talked about those outrageous numbers of what we see and experience, and then say, okay, now be calm. Don't make a bad decision. Don't display anger. The sad part about what happens with law enforcement officers is oftentimes it doesn't come into work. what happens is it's taken out at home on themselves through alcoholism, other types of addictions, or, our divorce rates are high, and unfortunately suicide. And our department has been kind of a spearhead in the state of Wisconsin for peer support and officer wellness. We unfortunately, in early in my career, we had 2 officers commit suicide in 6-month span. And it really said, okay, what are we going to do to make sure this will never happen again? And we invested and started building out one of the first peer support teams in the state of Wisconsin. We built that team and continued to move it up. And then we started teaching it across the state of Wisconsin to the point where Wisconsin has that. They have the peer support teams. But we didn't stop there. We started realizing that that's great. However, not everyone is willing to express all the different things that might be going on in their lives to someone that they work with, because our careers mean so much. Law enforcement has almost an overinvestment in their careers. So we started in 2020. It was actually in 2021, shortly after our riots. We invested in a clinical therapist that was assigned to just treat exclusively Kenosha police officers and Kenosha firefighters. This is an individual that does our yearly wellness check. So each officer does a wellness check where they go visit her, talk about anything they want, and just talk about different options and how things are going, setting up goals for their future and families and lives. And then making sure that they understand all the different resources that are available. They also walk them through financial counseling and some other things. And they come to any incident that happens on the road, critical incident with high levels of trauma, be it observed or experienced. We do debriefs, and we do 2 different debriefs. We do the first debrief is to learn from the incident and how we can respond and still continue to be excellent in the way we serve. And the second debrief is straight mental health. It's with our therapist talking us through as a group collectively of the different things we saw and experienced, and then meeting with them individually after. This is a taxing role, and I understand not every department has the ability to do that, but we've had buy-in from our administration in the city, and it's been an emphasis. I will, if it ever comes budget crunch time, she will be one of the last individuals that is eliminated, because it means so much to our department. I have had people come in my office in these first 2 years, and it's all confidential, so I have no idea what they're going through, and just look at me and tell me, thank you for having her. You don't understand that it saved my life. And that's more than one occasion. These are officers that are experiencing trauma and carrying it with them forever. So we're asking them to do some of the most incredible work and suffer through some of the most painstaking experiences. Not only do I think we owe it to them, I think it's an obligation that we have. They sign up for this job. They do not sign up to carry on that trauma for the rest of their life. I think we have a role in making sure we can make sure they're dealing with that in the most healthy way possible. And the last little thing, and I won't beat it, is and I'm a strong believer that that's also tied into physical health. I think that there's something to be said about those traumatic experiences and the adrenaline dumps that are not normal. We see it in military individuals, and we see it for sure in law enforcement. And how can we have physical fitness programs, not to say we're the biggest, strongest, fastest, but to make sure that your heart is happy, is not failing on you because of the adrenaline dumps and all the different things that you're going through, and staying proactive and making sure that not only do you reach a retirement age in this career that can be so rewarding, but also so burdensome, so that you can actually experience that retirement that you work so hard for. So we pair that with our peer support team, and it's a physical portion of it as well, making sure that they have healthy outlets for workouts. We have personal trainers that dedicate their time to help these officers, and we're building that program even today.
For our listeners, Chief Patton spent 8 years in the Marines, and I would imagine that if you think about your stereotype of a Marine, they are, whether they're been there 8 years or 30 years, they are always in shape. They are always physically fit in that context, and I guess to some degree you're trying to bring some of those lessons learned over to the policing side of this.
Yeah, I wish I was still in that shape, but does instill it to you to where you don't let yourself go completely. Otherwise, your friends will make fun of you too much. But what I will say is the military has always been a little like one step ahead in trauma processing, and they're not perfect either. But they were one of the first to finally eventually, say something we're doing is not right. The 22 number has always been there. I deployed to Iraq from 04 to 05 in a large unit. We lost 13 individuals while we were in Iraq, KIA. And since we've returned and been home, we have had 18 suicides from that group. So we were having more individuals come home either through the trauma they can't process, the failure to reassimilate, and all the different things that happen over life. Not all of them are directly related to the military, but there's something to be said about the fact that these young men and women were able to deploy overseas and fight a global war on terrorism. And it wasn't as lethal as returning home and dealing with it. And that's kind of where I kind of get my passion, my fire to hold that same type of vision for my law enforcement officers, because a lot of the same things happening. We see it every day. I always liken it to the trauma is going to come one way or another. Everyone is really, really focused on military because you can look at that singular event, right? Deployment into a war zone. And I think of that as two different fights, right? There's the mixed martial arts fight and there's the boxers, right? Both of them in the end of their career have heavy trauma and heavy damage through what they've done in their careers. The military seems to be more like the MMA one. Oh, they were deployed. Here's the heavy hit they took. That's why they have this trauma. It's harder to understand what a law enforcement officer went. They step into the ring hundreds of times, take hundreds of blows, and at the end of it, they're in the same spot. They arrive there a little bit differently. People don't realize that they are taking those micro punches over and over and over. And how can we help them deal with that? So I think sometimes we flew under the radar because you're not seeing that huge knockout blow every time.
I'm not trying to change your analogy. I would imagine it feels more like a football player who suffers the traumatic head injury over, thousands of small engagements in that sense, where you can't see it, but it's there and it just takes its toll. Versus, to your point, the MMA where you see the knee to the head and you see it's very visible.
You can look at that singular incident, and it's not what it is usually for law enforcement.
Correct. It's the day to day. I'd be remiss to not talk about what happened, unfortunately, today in Madison, where there was another school shooting, and I can't imagine that being if you think about the scale of trauma for what police officers have to do to have to go into a school in a active shooter situation. I can't imagine a higher degree of stress. I guess the good news is that incident's been resolved in the sense that there's no more of a threat, but 5 people have been killed, and now that community has to suffer. You and I talked before the show about some of the things you've tried to do in Kenosha to make schools safer, including even going out to Parkland. I'd love you to tell our listeners about that.
Yeah, so we've kind of been on the forefront as well of this within the state of Wisconsin, and we partnered early with the Office of School Safety, which is a state-run organization in Wisconsin that kind of helps design schools and make sure we have the different things in place to help us prevent any type of school violence. So we are really committed to the University of Virginia's model of it's called CSTAG. It's a comprehensive threat assessment guidelines put forth to kind of try to realize and take, kids say stupid things. Kids do stupid things. And we get school threats all the time. How do we take a systematic approach to make sure that their threats are not something that they're going to act on? So we have a comprehensive guide. So each school student is treated the same to make sure that we're not missing any threats, or at least getting as close to possible, with an actual process in place. Because, the one thing we hear every time is, well, police knew about this person, or they were on the radar, quote unquote. Well, what are we doing to make sure that we're following up with those individuals and monitoring those that are making those threats? And what are we doing to say if they can return or not return to those schools? Sometimes those aren't consistent, and that's what that model is helping us do. We also have started what's called the STAC, which is this School Threat Assessment Coalition of Kenosha. And now that's a statewide model of all the partners coming together to make sure we're doing everything we can in the schools to make them safe, and those that pose a threat to make sure that they are either removed or they're on a pathway towards coming back safely. And that's partnerships with our district attorney's office, all the different law enforcement agencies, and our school district. We have a great relationship with the school district. Like you said, we had individuals, we all went to Parkland before they took the buildings down, once the trial was completed. And they left it as a moment in time. They didn't change anything in Parkland. And to bring school administrators through that and let them know what it is we're trying to accomplish when we talk about school safety and why, to go through Parkland and walk and see backpacks still on the floor and bloodstains still on the floor and desks piled up in a corner against a door because those kids that were in there were so afraid that they were the next classroom to get hit. Those are those things that you need someone to actually see, to process, and really invest in what they're doing. And after that, there was already an investment, but now it was personal. And we do things all the time. We make sure the school resource program, officer program is well staffed and trained up. And then we do all the different drills within the district. And we're always looking at little things on response that we can take in to make things better. So last year, we were part of a robocall that went nationwide about a fake school shooting, and it used AI to actually talk through that, make it sound like that was actually occurring. Our officers responded, couldn't get into the building. So we immediately started breaking windows and getting in, because if you're ever going to try to stop an officer from getting into a school for a school shooting, they're going to get in. So now we have all this damage. What could we have done to get in faster? Well, let's make all of our vests contain the key codes or key cards that will get us through. But that might not get us into every building. So what we did is we installed blue boxes on the exterior of every building in our district. And we use that. We scan it, our badges. It pops open a blue box. Inside that blue box is master keys to every door within that place, numerous blueprints, emergency contact info, and rosters. We have that within seconds of arriving, and it gives us that much an advantage if there is an active threat, to stop that threat or stop those active killing. And then a simple response where we were responding for a kid that was unruly, and all we kept getting is that they were in room 112 or something like that. Well, a responding officer doesn't know where that is. And what a simple idea to listen to a responding officer who said, I really wish that was there. And you know what would be nice is if you put just a small placard that faces outward from the building, so we know what schoolroom is which room from the outside. And we just went through and did it on every building. And it was cheap. It was a vinyl stick. But now when officers respond and they know where the threat is based on intel that they're getting, they know where in the building this individual is or was. And it's all about tilting the scales in our favor towards safety and eliminating threats.
Well, and you'd like to ignore that those threats exist, but you can't. And the only way to deal with it is to be as prepared as you can be, and good on you and good on the state to invest, because you have to. Sadly, it's sad that you have to, but you have to. You can't ignore the construct. And I appreciate what you guys are doing to make the teachers and the officers that have to, that would have to unfortunately have to respond and be as prepared as they can be in that context. Well, Chief, I have one last question for you. You've been so kind with your time. We at PepperBall like to make a small donation on your and your agency's behalf to your favorite charity. So the kind of as we finish up, and again, this is Chief Patton. He's the police chief at Kenosha, Wisconsin. Kind of a culminating a 20-year career now. Been there 2 years, and we expect him to do great things in Kenosha and beyond. But Chief Patton, where can we make that small donation on your behalf?
Yeah, well, one, thank you for that. It's unnecessary, but I really appreciate it. I love your platform. I was unaware that this was a part of it, but I really do appreciate it. And I think it's awesome that you guys are doing that. I can't think of a better organization right off the top of my head than our Boys and Girls Club of Kenosha. They do great work here. They provide all the athletic programs, all the mentoring programs for all of our youth. It is the hub of where every portion of our community gets together and shares all different things from developing young leaders in our community to helping them participate with people they normally wouldn't be through sports and athletics. So that's always been a soft spot in my heart, and I really appreciate that.
Well, fantastic. And we will make that donation on your behalf. Again, Chief, thanks much for taking the time to be with us. As I reflect on the discussion, it's, there's some kind of familiar themes, and, they all center around preparing officers to serve their public in ways that are well beyond the old, track down the bad guy, to be able to serve the public in a way that's, that's in a much wider swath of issues and challenges with a much wider group of the public. These officers have to be better, they have to be trained in a much more empathetic way. What I come back to was Chief Patton's comments about hurt people hurt others. And it's such a, it's kind of makes sense. You hear it in a lot of different ways or different constructs, but in the context of policing, how important is it to ensure that police officers themselves are not hurt, or at least you can do what you can to reduce the amount of trauma that they internalize and either take home or take into their interactions with the public. And what I heard today from the chief was the aggressive use of a therapist or a psychologist on staff that's there to debrief with each officer after they've engaged a traumatic incident. Again, the statistic of 700 incidents in a police officer's career, that they have at least someone to be there with them in a professional way to engage every one of those 700 events to at least minimize the impact. So I walk away encouraged. Kenosha, it's a third largest city in Wisconsin, so it's a big place, but it is kind of the middle of America and a place that's proactively trying to address mental and physical health for its officers and trying to really be a much more active participant in the community. So, kind of feel good about this conversation that, these young new police chiefs are kind of starting to figure it out and get it right. This, again, my name is Bob Plaschke. I am the CEO of PepperBall. I am super grateful that I have the opportunity and the privilege to work every day and support emergency responders. And in this podcast, get a chance to talk about that. And again, thanks to PepperBall, who enables me to put this broadcast on. We'll see you next time. Thanks.